My name is Meredith, and I never thought at 32 years old my own father would point his finger in my face and demand I return $60,000 I never took. The worst part wasn't the accusation, but how quickly my entire family believed I would steal from my own mother. That night at our family dinner, as the words hung in the air, I realized blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Sometimes the people who should love you unconditionally are the ones who condemn you without evidence. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever been wrongfully accused by someone you trusted. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for how this story ends. I was always the responsible one in my family. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Phoenix, I learned early on that hard work was valued above all else. My father, Clark, worked as a construction foreman, often putting in 60-hour weeks to keep her family afloat. My mother, Diane, was a nurse at the local hospital, working night shifts so she could be home when we returned from school. They weren't perfect parents, but they tried their best with what they had. As the eldest daughter, I naturally fell into the role of helper. By age 12, I was cooking dinners when mom worked late. By 15, I was helping my younger sister Sloane with her homework and making sure she made it to her extracurricular activities on time. Looking back, I can see how this dynamic shaped our family roles early on. Sloane was 3 years younger than me, and from the beginning, we couldn't have been more different. Where I was practical and studious, Sloane was social and spontaneous. She had a natural charm that drew people to her. While I was more reserved, I noticed early on how my parents, especially my father, seemed to light up around her in a way they never did with me. It wasn't that they didn't love me, but their love for Sloane always seemed more unconditional, more freely given. Despite our differences, Sloane and I were close as children. We shared a bedroom until I was 16, whispering secrets late into the night and making plans for our futures. She'd talk about becoming famous, while I dreamed of financial security, something I'd noticed our parents struggling with throughout our childhood. Money was always tight in our household. I remember the hushed arguments behind closed doors, the pile of bills on the kitchen counter, and the way my mother would stretch a pound of ground beef to last 3 meals. When I was 14, I got my first job bagging groceries at the local supermarket. Every paycheck, I saved half and gave the other half to my parents, insisting they use it for bills. They initially refused, but eventually accepted my help with a mixture of pride and sadness that her teenage daughter felt responsible for contributing to family finances. Education was my ticket to a better life. I studied relentlessly throughout high school, earning a partial scholarship to Arizona State University. Even with the scholarship, college wasn't easy financially. I worked 30 hours a week at a campus bookstore while maintaining a full course load. There were nights I slept only 4 hours running on coffee and determination. Meanwhile, Sloane attended community college, dropped out after a year, and cycled through a series of retail jobs. After graduating with my accounting degree, I secured a position at a respected firm in Phoenix. The financial stability I'd craved my entire life was finally within reach. I moved into my own apartment, started building savings, and even began helping my parents with larger expenses. When their roof needed replacing 3 years ago, I covered half the cost. When Dad's truck broke down, I helped pay for repairs. It wasn't that I felt obligated exactly, but I wanted to ease their burden after all they had sacrificed for us. 2 years ago, my mother began experiencing health issues. What started as occasional forgetfulness progressed to concerning memory lapses. The doctors ran tests but couldn't provide a definitive diagnosis beyond mild cognitive impairment. During this time, I stepped in to help manage her finances. I set up automatic bill payments, organized her banking information, and checked her accounts regularly to ensure everything was in order. My father was grateful for the help, as numbers had never been his strong suit. Through all of this, I maintained my reputation as the reliable daughter, the one who could be counted on in a crisis. I took pride in this role, never imagining it would be used against me in the worst possible way. The night everything fell apart started like any other family dinner. It was a Sunday in April, and I'd arrived at my parents' house with a homemade apple pie, my mother's favorite. Clark was grilling chicken in the backyard, Diane was setting the table, and Sloane was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even.
Dinner began pleasantly enough. We talked about the unusually warm spring weather, Dad's upcoming fishing trip with his buddies, and my recent promotion at work. Mom seemed especially clear-headed that evening, laughing at Dad's corny jokes and asking thoughtful questions about my job. Sloan was quieter than usual, but I didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't until dessert that the atmosphere shifted. Clark cleared his throat in that deliberate way that always signaled he had something serious to discuss. My first thought was that maybe Mom's condition had worsened, and my stomach nodded with anticipation. "Meredith?" he began, his voice unnaturally controlled. "We need to talk about your mother's bank account." I set down my fork, confused. "What about it? Is something wrong with the automatic payments I set up?" The look he gave me was cold, unlike anything I had seen directed at me before. "Don't play dumb. We know what you've been doing." "Dad, I honestly don't know what you're talking about." He pushed back from the table so forcefully that the water glasses rattled. $60,000, Meredith. $60,000 is missing from your mother's account over the last 6 months. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. What? That's impossible. I help Mom balance her checkbook every month. There's no way that much money is missing. Diane, who had been silent until now, began to cry softly. "I trusted you with my finances, Meredith. How could you do this to me?" "Do what, Mom? I didn't take any money from you. I would never do that." I looked frantically between my parents, trying to make sense of what was happening. Clark slammed his hand on the table. "We have the bank statements right here." He pulled a folder from beside his chair and threw it across the table. Papers spilled out showing withdrawal slips and account summaries. Monthly withdrawals, all after you started helping with her accounts. With shaking hands, I examined the papers. There were indeed records of large cash withdrawals ranging from $8,000 to $12,000 each month, but I hadn't made these transactions. I looked up, desperate to convey my innocence. "I didn't make these withdrawals. This isn't my signature, Dad. Someone else must have access to Mom's account." "Your name is on her account as a cosigner," he countered. "No one else could have taken this money except you or your mother, and she certainly didn't withdraw it." Sloan, who had been watching the exchange with an odd expression, finally spoke up. "You've been acting weird lately, canceling plans, being secretive about your personal life, and suddenly you got that new car?" "My new car? I've been saving for that car for 3 years, and I've been busy with work because of my promotion. That has nothing to do with this." "The timing is suspicious," Sloan insisted. "Mom's money starts disappearing, and suddenly you're upgrading your lifestyle?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister was piling on accusations without a shred of evidence beyond circumstantial timing. I can prove where every dollar for my car came from. I have bank statements, loan documents, everything. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Return the $60,000 or don't come home again, Meredith. It's that simple."
"Dad, please," I begged, tears forming in my eyes. "I didn't take Mom's money. Why won't you believe me?" "Because the evidence is right here." He jabbed a finger at the bank statements. "You took advantage of your mother's condition to steal from her. What kind of daughter does that?" "You took Mom's money," Sloan added, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "We all know it." I looked at my mother, hoping to find some doubt in her eyes, some willingness to consider that I might be innocent. Instead, I saw only hurt and betrayal. "I want my money back," she whispered. "I was saving that for my medical care." The realization that my entire family had already convicted me without a trial was devastating. I stood up, legs unsteady beneath me. "I didn't take your money, Mom. I would never steal from you. But I'm going to find out who did." "Don't bother coming back without the money," my father called after me as I gathered my purse and keys. "You're no daughter of mine until you make this right." I walked out of my childhood home that night, feeling like I'd entered an alternate reality. How could my family, the people who had known me my entire life, believe I would steal from them? And more importantly, if I didn't take the money, then who did? The drive home was a blur. Tears obscured my vision as I navigated the familiar streets on autopilot, my mind racing with confusion and hurt. By the time I reached my apartment, my shock had begun to crystallize into determination. I knew I was innocent, and I was going to prove it. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night poring over my own financial records, pulling up bank statements and credit card bills from the past 6 months. I needed to be absolutely certain there was no way the missing money had somehow ended up in my accounts by mistake. By morning, I had confirmed what I already knew. There was no mysterious $60,000 in my possession. I called in sick to work the next day, something I rarely did. This situation required my full attention. My first step was to visit my mother's bank. As a cosigner on her account, I had every legal right to request information despite my family's accusations. The branch manager, a woman named Linda, who had known my mother for years, greeted me warmly. Her friendly demeanor faltered when I explained the situation. I need to see all withdrawal records for the past 6 months on my mother's account. I'm still a legal cosigner regardless of what's happening in our family. Linda hesitated. This is unusual, but yes, you do have the right to access these records. I can print out the transaction history and copies of the withdrawal slips. 20 minutes later, I sat in a private consultation room with a stack of papers before me. The evidence was even more damning than I'd realized. There had been 10 separate withdrawals over 6 months, all for large round amounts, $10,000 here, $12,000 there. Each withdrawal slip bore a signature that resembled my mother's, but something was off. I pulled out my phone and found a picture of a birthday card my mother had sent me last year. Comparing her authentic signature to those on the withdrawal slips, I could see subtle differences. The loop on the D in Diane was tighter on the real signature. The slant of her writing was more pronounced. Someone had forged her signature and done a decent but imperfect job of it. But who? The obvious answer was uncomfortable to consider. As a cosigner, I was one of only 2 people who could legally withdraw money from the account without triggering fraud alerts. The other was my mother herself, who I was certain hadn't made these withdrawals given her reaction at dinner. There was a third possibility, though. If someone had access to my mother's ID and knew enough personal information to satisfy a cursory verification, they might have been able to impersonate her. And there was only one person besides me who would have such intimate knowledge of my mother's personal information: Sloane. The thought made me sick to my stomach. Could my own sister be stealing from our mother and letting me take the blame? It seemed both unthinkable and, given her behavior at dinner, disturbingly possible. I needed more information. Linda, I called, returning to the manager's desk. Is there any way to know which teller processed these withdrawals or if there's surveillance footage of the transactions? Linda frowned. The teller information is on each slip. As for footage, the bank only keeps it for 90 days for security purposes. This meant I could potentially access footage for the most recent withdrawals, but not the earlier ones. It was a start. I'd like to request the available footage for these dates. I pointed to the 3 most recent withdrawal slips. I believe someone is impersonating either me or my mother.
This is becoming a serious matter, Linda said. If you're alleging fraud, we should involve our security team. Not yet, I replied quickly. I need to gather more evidence first. This is a family matter, and I want to handle it carefully. Linda reluctantly agreed to my request, promising to have the security team pull the available footage and contact me when it was ready. My next step was to call my friend Jessica, who worked as a financial crimes analyst at a different bank. We met for coffee that afternoon, and I laid out the entire situation. This is definitely identity theft, Jessica said after examining copies of the withdrawal slips I'd obtained. The question is, who's doing it? I think it might be my sister, I admitted. The words were painful to say aloud. But I need more evidence before I make that accusation to my parents. They already don't believe me. Jessica nodded sympathetically. Follow the money. Whoever took $60,000 either spent it on something significant or deposited it somewhere. Look for changes in your sister's lifestyle, major purchases, new accounts. It was solid advice. I spent the next few days discreetly investigating Sloane's recent activities. Through social media, I noticed she'd posted photos of a new designer purse, expensive restaurant meals, and a weekend trip to Vegas 2 months ago that I hadn't heard about. None of these things were smoking guns on their own, but collectively, they suggested a level of spending that didn't align with her job as a retail manager. I also remembered something odd. 6 months ago, around when the withdrawals began, Sloane had introduced the family to her new boyfriend, Travis. I'd only met him twice, finding him charming but somewhat evasive about his work and background. Could he be involved somehow? A quick internet search revealed that Travis had a LinkedIn profile listing him as a financial consultant, but with no specific company mentioned. His Facebook page showed similar luxury spending to Sloane's: expensive watches, high-end restaurants, and a new motorcycle. I needed to dig deeper into this connection. Using a mutual friend as an excuse, I invited Sloane to lunch, hoping to gather more information without revealing my suspicions. She accepted surprisingly quickly, perhaps seeing an opportunity to continue portraying me as the villain in the family drama. We met at a casual restaurant downtown. Sloane arrived 20 minutes late, dressed in clothes that I recognized as being well beyond her normal budget. "Nice blouse," I commented casually. "Is it new?" "Yeah," she said with a dismissive shrug. "Just a little something I picked up last week." I recognized the brand, having browsed the same store recently. The blast would have cost at least $300. Things must be going well at the store. "They're fine." She changed the subject quickly. "Have you returned Mom's money yet?" I maintained my composure with effort. "Sloane, I didn't take Mom's money. I'm trying to figure out what really happened." She rolled her eyes. "Give it up, Meredith. The evidence is clear. Just admit what you did, return the money, and maybe the family can start to heal." Throughout lunch, I noticed how Sloane deflected questions about her finances and Travis while continuing to press me about the missing money. Her phone buzzed constantly with texts, which she checked anxiously. When I casually asked if it was Travis texting, her reaction was defensive and guarded. After lunch, my suspicions had only grown stronger. On an impulse, I drove past Sloane's apartment building. In the parking lot, I spotted Travis's motorcycle, and beside it, a brand new SUV that I hadn't seen before. It was exactly the kind of vehicle Sloane had talked about wanting for years. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I still needed hard evidence. The bank called the next day to inform me that the security footage was ready. With growing anticipation and dread, I went to view it. The bank's security room was small and windowless, with several monitors displaying different camera angles of the branch. Linda and a security officer named Steve sat with me as they queued up the footage from the dates I'd requested. "We've located 3 separate videos that match the withdrawal dates you specified," Steve explained. "The camera angle gives a clear view of the teller window." The first video began to play. My heart raced as I watched the timestamp in the corner, knowing this would be the moment of truth. A woman approached the teller window, her back to the camera. She wore a hat and sunglasses, but her build and height were inescapable. "That's my sister," I whispered, a mixture of vindication and heartbreak washing over me.
The footage showed Sloane presenting ID to the teller, engaging in casual conversation, and then receiving a large amount of cash. She signed the withdrawal slip with practiced ease, making it look natural. The second and third videos showed similar scenes, though in one, Travis waited nearby, casually browsing a pamphlet stand while Sloane conducted the transaction. "Would it be possible to get copies of these videos?" I asked. Steve nodded. "We can provide them, since you're a co-signer on the account. But, Miss Wilson, this appears to be fraud. The bank will need to open an investigation." "I understand," I said, "but please give me a few days before you make it official. This is my family, and I need to handle it carefully." With copies of the footage and transaction records in hand, I had solid evidence of who had been stealing from my mother's account. But something still didn't make sense. Why would Sloane need $60,000? Even with her spending habits, that was an enormous sum. My investigation deepened as I began looking more closely at my sister's life. Through a mutual friend who worked at Sloane's store, I learned that she had been having problems at work, nearly fired twice for cash register discrepancies. More concerning, there were rumors that she often disappeared on her breaks to place bets with a bookie who operated near the mall. A gambling problem would explain the need for large sums of cash, but I needed more concrete evidence before confronting my family. I decided to take a risk. Using the spare key to Sloane's apartment that I'd kept for emergencies, I let myself in while I knew she was at work. I felt terrible violating her privacy this way, but the stakes were too high to worry about niceties. Inside, I found evidence that confirmed my worst fears. Hidden in her desk drawer were multiple overdue notices from credit card companies, a letter from a payday loan company threatening collections, and most damning of all, handwritten IOUs to someone named Vince totaling over $30,000. There were also brochures for casinos in Las Vegas and receipts from online gambling sites. As I continued searching, I found something even more disturbing. In Sloane's nightstand was a small notebook containing what appeared to be practice versions of my mother's signature. Page after page showed attempts to perfect the forgery, with notes in the margins about specific letter formations. But the most heartbreaking discovery came when I found a folder labeled Mom's Medical, tucked beneath Sloane's mattress. Inside were medical reports that I'd never seen before, including a neurologist's assessment from 3 months ago that clearly stated my mother was showing early signs of dementia. The doctor had recommended follow-up appointments and possible medication, but to my knowledge, none of this had happened. My family had been hiding my mother's condition from me. Perhaps they thought I already had too much on my plate, or maybe they were in denial themselves. Whatever the reason, this information put the missing money in a new light. The $60,000 my mother mentioned saving for medical care would likely be essential for her treatment going forward. As I was about to leave, I noticed Sloane's phone on the counter. She must have forgotten it in her rush to work. On impulse, I picked it up. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. I quickly checked her text messages, finding a lengthy thread between her and Travis discussing money, my mother's account, and most incriminating, messages about making sure Meredith takes the fall if anything goes wrong. I took photos of everything I'd found with my own phone, ensuring I had digital evidence that couldn't be easily destroyed. As I was finishing, I heard a key in the lock. Panicking, I slipped into the hallway closet just as Sloane and Travis entered the apartment. "I can't believe I forgot my phone," Sloane was saying. "Vince has been blowing it up all day. He says if we don't get him the money by Friday, he's coming after you." "Relax," Travis replied. "We've got it covered. One more withdrawal from your mom's account should take care of it." "We can't," Sloane said, her voice tight with stress. "Meredith's been to the bank asking questions. They might be watching the account now." "Then we need to make sure the blame stays firmly on her," Travis insisted. "Your parents already believe she took the money. We just need to keep it that way until we can figure out how to pay Vince." "And what about Mom's treatments?" Sloane asked, a rare note of guilt in her voice. "Your dad's got that construction company pension. They'll manage. Right now, we need to worry about ourselves."
I remained frozen in the closet, hardly daring to breathe as they retrieved Sloane's phone and left. Once I was sure they were gone, I slipped out of the apartment, my mind reeling from what I'd overheard. The truth was now painfully clear. My sister and her boyfriend had stolen $60,000 from our mother, money intended for her medical care, to pay gambling debts, and they had deliberately set me up to take the blame. What hurt even more was realizing my parents had kept my mother's worsening condition from me. Despite all I'd done to help them over the years, they still didn't trust me with the truth about her health. I drove home in a daze, overwhelmed by the layers of betrayal. My family was in deeper trouble than I'd imagined, and fixing it would require more than just exposing Sloane's theft. Armed with evidence and a growing sense of resolve, I decided to approach my parents directly. Perhaps seeing proof of Sloane's deception would open their eyes to the truth. I called ahead to make sure they would both be home and that Sloane wouldn't be there. My father answered the door with a cold expression that softened slightly when he saw my serious demeanor. "Have you brought the money back?" he asked, his voice gruff but lacking the anger from our last encounter. "No, Dad. I've brought the truth. Can we talk inside?" He hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. Mom was sitting in her favorite armchair, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Her eyes lit up briefly when she saw me, then clouded with confusion. "Meredith brought some information about the missing money," Clark explained to her slowly. I sat across from them and carefully laid out what I'd discovered. The bank footage showing Sloan making withdrawals, the forged signatures, the evidence of gambling debts. I showed them photos of the practice signatures I'd found in Sloan's apartment and played a recording I'd made of Travis's conversation about pinning the blame on me. "This is ridiculous," my father interrupted, though I could see doubt beginning to creep into his expression. "You could have doctored these videos or planted this evidence." "Dad, why would I do that? Think about it. I've always helped this family financially. I have a good job, savings, investments. Why would I suddenly need to steal from Mom?" Before he could answer, the front door opened and Sloan walked in. She froze when she saw me sitting with our parents, surrounded by evidence. "What's she doing here? I thought you said she wasn't welcome until she returned the money." "Your sister has brought some concerning information," Diane said, her voice surprisingly clear. "She says you took my money, Sloan." Sloan Cease flushed red. "That's absurd. She's just trying to shift the blame because she got caught." She turned to me with venom in her eyes. "How dare you come here and try to turn them against me?" "I have video footage of you at the bank, Sloan, making withdrawals from Mom's account on 3 separate occasions. The bank is opening a fraud investigation." "You're lying," she screamed, but the panic in her eyes told a different story. "I also found these in your apartment." I hold up my phone showing photos of the IOUs and practice signatures and played a recording I'd made of Travis's conversation about pinning the blame on me. My father stood up abruptly. "You broke into your sister's apartment. That's illegal, Meredith." I couldn't believe he was focusing on that detail rather than the evidence of Sloan's theft. "I used the spare key you gave me for emergencies. This qualifies, don't you think?" "You had no right," Sloan shouted, tears streaming down her face now. "You've always been jealous of me, always trying to make yourself look better by tearing me down." "Jealous?" I laughed incredulously. "Sloan, I've spent my entire adult life helping this family, while you've taken and taken. And now you've stolen money that Mom needs for her medical care." A heavy silence fell over the room at my words. My mother looked down at her hands, and my father's expression darkened. "You know about her diagnosis," he said quietly. "Yes, I found the medical reports in Sloan's apartment. Why didn't you tell me Mom has dementia? I could have helped with her care, with finding specialists."
"We didn't want to burden you," Diane said softly. "You already do so much." "It wasn't your business," Sloan cut in. "You're always trying to control everything, acting like you're so perfect. Maybe I did take some money, but it was because I needed help and knew you'd just judge me for it." Her partial admission hung in the air. My father looked between us, clearly struggling to process everything. "How much did you take, Sloan?" he finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "It doesn't matter," she deflected. "What matters is Meredith breaking into my home and invading my privacy." $60,000. I exploded. "She took $60,000 from Mom's account to pay gambling debts, money that was supposed to be for Mom's treatment. And instead of admitting it, she let you believe I stole it. She let you tell me I was dead to you if I didn't return money I never took." The front door opened again and Travis walked in. He assessed the situation quickly, his charming smile faltering when he saw the evidence spread out on the coffee table. "What's going on here?" he asked, moving to stand beside Sloan. "We know everything," I told him. "About the withdrawals, the gambling debts, all of it." "You don't know anything," he sneered, but I could see the calculation in his eyes as he looked for an escape route.
I know Vince is expecting his money by Friday, I said, watching his face pale. I know you both planned to frame me if you got caught. I know you've been using my sister and stealing from my mother. My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly stood up and pointed at the door. "Get out of my house," he said to Travis, his voice shaking with anger. "Dad, wait! It's not what it looks like. Travis was helping me invest the money. We were going to pay it back with interest." "Investing?" I scoffed. "Is that what you call losing $30,000 to a bookie memed Vince?" The color drained from Sloane's face. "How do you know about Vince?" "I heard you and Travis talking about him, about how he's coming after Travis if you don't pay by Friday." My mother began to cry quietly. "My savings, for my treatments, it's all gone." The reality of what they had done seemed to finally hit Sloane. She sank onto the couch, her defiance crumbling. "I was going to pay it back," she insisted weakly. "I just needed a little more time." "Time for what?" my father demanded. "To gamble more? To steal more from your mother?" Travis, sensing the tide turning against them, began inching toward the door. "This is a family matter. I should go and let you sort this out." "Don't you dare leave," my father growled. "You helped my daughter steal from her sick mother. You're not going anywhere except to the police station." "Police?" Sloane's head snapped up. "Dad, no! You can't call the police on us." "Watch me," he said, reaching for his phone. What followed was chaos. Sloane began sobbing hysterically, while Travis tried to convince my father that involving the police would only make things worse. Neighbors who had heard the shouting came to the door to check if everything was all right, adding to the humiliation of having our family's dirty laundry exposed. Throughout it all, I sat beside my mother, holding her hand as she processed the betrayal of her younger daughter. "I thought it was you," she kept saying. "We accused you of something so terrible, and you were innocent all along." "It's okay, Mom," I told her, though it wasn't. Not really. The ease with which they had believed the worst of me had damaged something fundamental in our relationship. Eventually, Travis left after my father threatened to call the police immediately if he didn't leave Sloane and our family alone for good. Sloane retreated to her old bedroom, still sobbing about how unfair everything was and how she was the real victim. Left alone with my parents, I faced the uncomfortable aftermath of vindication. "I need you both to understand something," I said quietly. "The fact that you immediately assumed I would steal from you without even giving me the benefit of the doubt has hurt me deeply. I don't know if our relationship can ever be the same." "We made a terrible mistake," my father admitted, looking suddenly old and defeated. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe ever, but I hope you'll give us a chance to make it right."
I wasn't ready to offer forgiveness. Not yet. Right now, we need to focus on Mom's care and figuring out what to do about the stolen money. The rest will have to wait. As I left that night, I felt hollow rather than triumphant. I had cleared my name, but at what cost? My sister might face criminal charges. My mother's condition was worse than I'd known, and the trust within our family was shattered. The question now was whether anything could be salvaged from the wreckage. In the week following the confrontation, I threw myself into gathering conclusive evidence. The bank's fraud department had officially opened an investigation, providing me with copies of all transaction records and teller slips with the forged signatures. The surveillance footage clearly showed Sloane making the withdrawals, sometimes alone and sometimes with Travis hovering nearby. I consulted with a lawyer friend, Megan, about potential legal actions. "Your sister committed identity theft and bank fraud," she explained during our meeting. "These are serious crimes with potential jail time." "And if I decide not to press charges?" I asked, still conflicted about sending my own sister to jail despite everything she'd done. "That would be up to you and your mother, since she's the primary victim. But remember, your sister stole $60,000 that was meant for your mother's medical care. That money needs to be recovered somehow." The theft had placed my family in a precarious financial position. My father had contacted me privately, admitting that their savings were nearly depleted after paying for my mother's initial medical assessments. The $60,000 had represented the bulk of their retirement nest egg, set aside specifically for my mother's future care needs. "We were counting on that money to get your mother into a memory care facility when the time comes," he confessed, his voice heavy with worry. "Without it, I don't know what we'll do." I promised to help them figure something out, regardless of what happened with Sloan. Family obligations ran deep, despite recent events. Meanwhile, Sloan had been alternating between tearful apologies and defensive accusations. She called me repeatedly, sometimes begging for forgiveness, and other times blaming me for ruining her life by exposing her theft. "You could have just talked to me privately," she argued during one call. "Instead, you humiliated me in front of Mom and Dad. Like you did to me. You let them believe I stole from Mom. You let Dad tell me I was dead to him if I didn't return money I never took. I was desperate. Vince was threatening Travis. I didn't know what else to do." "You could have asked for help, Sloan. You could have told the truth." "Would you have helped me pay gambling debts?" she asked bitterly. The question gave me pause. Would I have? Probably not in the way she wanted, by simply handing over cash. But I would have supported her getting professional help for her gambling addiction. I would have stood by her through recovery. That's what family was supposed to do. With this complete evidence portfolio in hand, I had to make a decision about pressing charges. This wasn't just about punishing Sloan. It was about whether there was any path forward for our family. I arranged to meet my parents at their home again, bringing the evidence file with me. Sloan would be there too, at my insistence. This needed to be resolved with everyone present. The atmosphere was tense as we gathered in the living room. My mother looked frail, the stress of recent events taking a visible toll. My father seemed to have aged years in just a week. Sloan sat apart from them, eyes downcast. "I've brought everything together," I said, placing the file on the coffee table. "The bank has confirmed this was fraud. They're waiting on our decision about pressing charges before they proceed." "Charges?" my mother repeated, distressed. "Against Sloan?" "Yes, Mom. What she did was criminal. She stole $60,000 from you by forging your signature." Sloan began to cry softly. "I know what I did was wrong. I got in too deep with gambling. Travis convinced me it was just borrowing, that we'd win it back and replace it before anyone noticed." "But you didn't win it back," my father said flatly. "And when you were caught, you blamed your sister." "I panicked. I didn't know what else to do." She looked up at me pleadingly. "Meredith, please don't send me to jail. I'll do anything to make this right."
I took a deep breath, having already decided my course of action during my drive over. "I'm not pressing charges on one condition. You get help for your gambling addiction, and you find a way to pay back every cent you took from Mom." Relief washed over her face, quickly followed by confusion. How am I supposed to pay back that much money? I don't have it. "You'll figure it out," I said firmly. "Get a second job. Sell your designer clothes in that new SUV. Ask Travis to contribute since he was part of this too. I don't care how you do it, but Mom needs that money for her care." My father nodded in agreement. "Your sister is showing you more mercy than you deserve. If it were solely up to me, you'd be facing a judge right now." "There is one more thing," I added. "I want you to tell me, right now, why you thought it was okay to let Mom and Dad believe I stole the money. I want you to hear you say it out loud." Sloan squirmed uncomfortably. I know they would believe it was you because you handle Mom's finances. It was convenient." "No, the real reason, Sloan." She looked down at her hands. "Because they always forgive me," she whispered. "They never forgive you. I knew if they thought it was you, they'd cut you off. But if they knew it was me, they'd find a way to excuse it." Her brutal honesty hung in the air. My parents looked stricken, perhaps recognizing the truth in her assessment of their parenting. "That's the pattern that needs to change," I said, addressing my parents now. "You enabled this behavior by always holding Sloan to a lower standard. That stops now, or I walk away from this family for good." My father nodded in agreement. "Your sister is showing you more mercy than you deserve. If it were solely up to me, you'd be facing a judge right now." "There is one more thing," I added. "I want you to tell me right now why you thought it was okay to let Mom and Dad believe I stole the money. I want to hear you say it out loud." Sloan squirmed uncomfortably. I knew they would believe it was you because you handle Mom's finances. It was convenient." "No, the real reason, Sloan." She looked down at her hands. "Because they always forgive me," she whispered. "They never forgive you. I knew if they thought it was you, they'd cut you off. But if they knew it was me, they'd find a way to excuse it." Her brutal honesty hung in the air. My parents looked stricken, perhaps recognizing the truth in her assessment of their parenting. "That's the pattern that needs to change," I said, addressing my parents now. "You enabled this behavior by always holding Sloan to a lower standard. That stops now, or I walk away from this family for good." My father nodded slowly, tears in his eyes. "You're right. We failed both of you in different ways." My mother reached for my hand. "Can you forgive us, Meredith, for not believing in you when we should have?" I didn't answer immediately. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily after such a profound betrayal. "I'm willing to try," I finally said, "but things will need to change." Over the following months, our family slowly began to rebuild. Sloan stayed committed to her recovery, working 2 jobs to make monthly payments toward the stolen money. My parents attended family therapy sessions, confronting the patterns that had contributed to our dysfunction. My mother's medication helped stabilize her condition, giving us precious time to strengthen our relationships before her illness progressed further. As for me, I maintained a careful distance while remaining involved in my mother's care. Trust, once broken, couldn't be instantly restored, but I found that helping my family navigate this crisis had given me a new perspective on my own worth. I was more than the reliable daughter, the financial provider, the responsible one. I was a woman who stood up for truth, who refused to accept blame for something I hadn't done, who demanded respect rather than settling for less. 6 months after that final confrontation, my mother called to invite me to Sunday dinner. "Just us this time," she assured me. "Your father and I want to talk to you." I accepted cautiously, unsure what to expect. When I arrived, the house smelled of pot roast, my favorite childhood meal. My parents welcomed me with a warmth that felt genuine rather than performative. After dinner, my father cleared his throat. "We've been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of talking in therapy about how we failed you, not just during this incident with Sloan, but throughout your life." My mother took over. "We put so much pressure on you to be the responsible one, the helper. We took your support for granted while making excuses for your sister. It wasn't fair, and we're deeply sorry. We're proud of you, Meredith, not just for what you do for this family, but for who you are, for your integrity, for standing up for yourself when we should have stood up for you." Their words touched something deep within me, a wound I hadn't realized was still so raw. For the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself to cry in front of them. I needed to hear that. For so long, I felt like my value to this family was tied to what I could provide,
not who I am. That's on us, my mother said, taking my hand. And we want to change that, if you'll give us the chance.
It wasn't an instant fix. True reconciliation would take time, consistent effort, and fundamental changes in how we related to each other. But sitting there with my parents, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again: hope for our family's future. Sloan and I were working on our relationship separately with the help of a family therapist. It was a slower process, the betrayal having cut deeper, but we were making progress, one difficult conversation at a time. When my father had issued that ultimatum months ago, demanding I return money I hadn't taken or never come home again, I could never have imagined where it would lead. By refusing to accept false blame, by investigating the truth, and by standing firm in my innocence, I had given them exactly what they asked for: a reason to mean it. And in doing so, I had forced a reckoning that our family desperately needed. Sometimes families break before they can heal properly. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in comfortable lies. And sometimes standing in your truth is the only way to build relationships worth having. A year later, Sloan had paid back $35,000 of the stolen money. She was still in recovery, attending meetings regularly, and working with a therapist to address the underlying issues that had led to her gambling addiction. Travis had completely disappeared from her life, last heard fleeing to another state to avoid Vince and other creditors. My mother's condition had stabilized with proper medication and care. We'd found an excellent neurologist who specialized in early-stage dementia, and she was participating in a clinical trial for a promising new treatment. The remaining money from her savings, combined with careful financial planning, would be enough to ensure she received quality care. My father had undergone perhaps the biggest transformation. He'd started individual therapy to examine his parenting patterns and had made genuine efforts to rebuild our relationship. For the first time in my adult life, our conversations weren't centered around what I could do for the family, but who I was as a person. As for me, I'd learned valuable lessons about boundaries, self-worth, and the difference between being helpful and being taken advantage of. I continued to support my family, but on my own terms. I was no longer the family's automatic solution to every problem. And surprisingly, everyone had risen to meet the challenge. The bank fraud investigation had been closed without charges, as we'd requested. The bank had implemented new security measures to prevent similar identity theft in the future. Linda, the branch manager, had even thanked me for bringing the fraud to their attention, as it had helped them identify weaknesses in their verification process. Most importantly, I'd reclaimed my sense of self-worth. For years, I'd measured my value by how much I could give to others, how many problems I could solve, how indispensable I could make myself. This crisis had taught me that true family love shouldn't require me to sacrifice my dignity or accept false blame. The night my father pointed his finger at me and accused me of stealing $60,000, I thought my world was ending. In reality, it was just beginning. That confrontation forced us all to examine uncomfortable truths about our family dynamics, our individual failings, and what we really meant to each other. It took months of therapy, difficult conversations, and genuine effort from everyone involved, but we emerged as a stronger, more honest family. Not perfect, but real. Not without problems, but with the tools to address them openly. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought to clear your name? Or might you have walked away from a family that was so quick to believe the worst about you? Have you ever had to stand up to loved ones who wrongly accused you? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by the integrity with which you live your life. Sometimes the people who should love you unconditionally are the ones who need to learn how to love you properly. Don't be afraid to teach them.